The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Joseph Cocke. He was born on November 25th, 1921. He served in the Army during World War II and the Korean War. He achieved the rank of Staff Sergeant. We're recording this on February 17th, 2012. I am Daniel Mack, and I am of no relation. So, Mr. Cocke, would you please tell me about growing up during the 1920s and 1930s?
Well, that was during the Great Depression, and I guess as a youngster, we weren't aware of all the problems that the adults had. So we were not affected to that extent, but we remember how things were, and it was rough on everybody. I lived in a small town, and most of the people out here were farmers, and so food was not a problem. People had no money, but at least nobody starved, and they looked after everybody else. Of course, I went to school there. It was a small school. Schools at that time were affected somewhat by the Depression because school districts did not have, in some places, did not have enough money to operate schools year-round. So depending on how much money they had, depending on how long the schools were. Fortunately, in our area, the schools did last 9 months, so we were fortunate in that extent. But it was being a small town of about 1,000 to 1,500. You knew everybody, and everybody knew you. So I look on that as a plus thing. Maybe sometimes if some things that you did as a child, that word might get back to your parents before you got there. So, but still, the people looked after you, and it was even though there were tough times with people, personally, my family didn't suffer. And I don't think anybody in my hometown really suffered. I think that there was plenty to eat. Maybe they didn't have new clothes, or sometimes they had to wear patch clothes, but at least they could be clean.
And when would you have graduated high school?
I graduated from Alachua High School in 1939. That was a little while ago.
What was the, from high school, where did you go?
I went to the University of Florida, and it was there in spring of 1941 when the war was raging in Europe, and of course we were supplying our allies with a whole lot of material. The draft was in effect, and we were building a lot of military camps throughout the country to take care of the draft. And being in school and under those conditions, we knew that eventually we were probably going to be at war, and it wasn't conducive to studying. So about 3 or 4 of my buddies and I decided that when school was out that spring, we would get a job. And we went to work in Waycross, Georgia with the railroad. That was pretty rough work, but we were making big money. I think we started off at 43 cents an hour. In today's terms, that's not much money, but at 43 cents an hour, we were working 44 hours a week. We had plenty of money. We paid for room and board, had money left over. We felt like millionaires, really. But in terms of today's, that was nothing. But we did okay.
Do you remember what minimum wage was back then, or do you remember what minimum wage would have been back then, or if there was there a federal standard minimum?
No, there was no federal standard. This was a standard rate, and with the railroads, I think I had a raise there before I went to service. So, and the work, it was tough work. We worked in the shops. Waycross was a big railroad town. They had tremendous shops there. And that was when they still had a lot of steam locomotives. And they had a big roundhouse. They repaired and built freight cars, or repaired passenger cars. They did a lot of just minor repairs on the trains that came through. So it was a big, probably, there was well over 1,000 people employed there at the shops and with the railroad.
And leading into December 1941, what were you doing, and where were you on December 7th?
Yeah, I was still railroading. In 1941, they dropped the draft age to 20, and I was going to be 20 in November of 1941. So I went down on 25th of November. I registered for the draft, and about 2 weeks later, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And we had they assigned a number to every person that registered for the draft. And you kept looking for the number if your number was called up that month. And eventually mine was called up, and in late October, or late August, we went to Fort McPherson in Atlanta, and I believe it was September the 1st I was sworn in and became a member of the U.S. Army. We were granted 2 weeks of leave to go home and clear up all of our business. When we left Atlanta, and let me back up a little bit, going up to Atlanta, there were probably about 40 fellows on this bus. And we had fellows that had been in prison. We had fellows that had been moonshiners. We had fellows that could not read or write. We had fellows that had never been out of Ware County, Georgia, in that area around Waycross. And frankly, I was the highest educated person on the bus. Now, when we left Atlanta, the captain called me forward and gave me a bunch of records. And he said, take these back to your draft board. And said, coming back, you're going to be in charge of all these men. Well, here I was, probably one of the youngest there, and the other guys probably ranged up in age to about 40. And when I went down to the draft board, just before we started back, we were told we were going to go back on the A, B, and C railroad, which was Atlanta, Birmingham, and Coast. Now that was an old railroad. They had not modernized. The coaches were about World War I vintage. But we went down on the morning that we were assembled, and fortunately everybody was there. All the guys were there, and there were probably about 35 left. About 5 guys were not accepted, so there were about 35 guys. There were probably a couple hundred people there to wish them off. There was no air conditioning now on the coach, so the windows were up. Everybody telling everybody goodbye. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were probably hating to see their sons or their husbands or their kin go. But I imagine some were happy to see them go. We started out, and the Moonshiners had brought some of the moonshine with them. And they were drinking. And the train now, the ABC, traveled through all these small towns in Georgia on the way to Atlanta. And every time it stopped, the guys would get off the coach. They'd go looking for beer or anything they could find. And the first stop we made, we had to take a long time to round them up. We finally got everybody back on the coach. And so the conductor and I decided that what we'd do, we had the engineer to blow the whistle about 2 minutes before we were supposed to leave the town. That meant everybody hurried back to the coach. Well, most of them did. We had to round up some, but this happened on every little old town. Now, the only thing I told the guys, I said, when you get to Atlanta, you better not have any whiskey on you. Then some of you are going to be having a hangover. It took all day to get up there. But we managed to get up there after every stop and round them up. By the time we got to Atlanta, the Moonshiners were drunk, and they were offering everybody a drink, and they had to throw some out. But we got there okay, and everybody was accounted for. When we got off the train, the same captain that had seen us off was out there, and he looked at us, and I told him everybody was there. He said, I didn't think it would be. I didn't either. but that was my first experience, and first story really that of a comical nature that occurred. Most of the things I remember from that time is not so much the things of horror, but the comical things. You know, you forget. As I told you earlier, I forget about a lot of things that happen. You forget about names, except somebody that you were so close with that you'll never forget them. Most of the things that we remember really are so ingrained in a memory that you can still visualize it. You can see people, you can see events, you can see anything, and it's almost you can never wipe it out. And some of that's good and some of it's bad. I like to remember those funny things. A lot of them happened. The outfit I went to Europe with, we were a company of about 125 men, and the officers in that company selected the men on basis of 2 things. Do you like what you're supposed to do, what you're trying to do? and do you like sports? And I thought that was kind of strange. I could understand liking what you're supposed to do, because if you like what you're doing, you're going to do a good job. If you like sports, and he finally said, if you like sports, it means you're well-rounded, and you're going to be active. And I said, that's pretty good. So that's the two terms of which he selected men for our outfit. And we had a pretty broad spectrum. Most of the, I guess the oldest person in our outfit was in his 40s, and that was Hurley. I don't remember his first name. We gave nicknames to most of the guys, or something they did, or some it had something to do maybe with the way they looked, or what they did, or various things. Hurley didn't have a nickname. Hurley was from Boston. He was an Irishman. And if you've seen a picture, of course, you probably don't remember Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House of Representatives. Tip was a typical Irishman. He was a large-sized guy, ruddy complexion, and had a red nose. And Hurley would pass as his brother. He wasn't quite as big as Tip O'Neill, but he had that red nose, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer would have envied him. But Hurley, I don't recall whether he owned a bar, managed a bar, or was a bartender, but it was apparent he spent a lot of time in a bar. And he was our, I guess, a designated drunk in our company. Now Hurley was not one of those belligerent types. He would get his helmet and sit out on the ground and take a drink, and he didn't use a chaser, he just drank out of the bottle. He was very quiet. He'd sit there and smile and look at you, but never make any. But I could picture him now sitting on that helmet. Well, I believe he could sniff out a bottle of booze from 10 miles away with that red nose. And no matter where we were in Europe, he always had a bottle with him, either in his knapsack or in his duffel bag. And one morning we were there, and Hurley reached into his duffel bag and pulled out this bottle of booze, took off the cork and just took one big swig. And he said, Joe, said, I gotta have a drink to sober up. I said, Hurley, that's what got you drunk in the first place. How's it gonna sober you up? I don't know, but I'm willing to try. On the opposite end was Felix. Now Felix, Mendoza was New Mexico. Felix was probably the youngest guy in our outfit. And Felix probably never had a drop of alcohol in his life. We were someplace in France that was in grape harvesting time, and a short distance where we were was a winery. And Felix said to me one day, he said, Joe, let's walk down to the winery. I like to see what it looks like. And Felix got his name. I don't remember his first name, but Felix got his name because he always had a smile, a grin. And it was Felix the cat. So he got the name Felix because he always had that grin like a cat. Well, Felix and I walked down to the winery, and there was an old Frenchman out there, and he motioned for us to come on in. Now, we couldn't speak much French, and Frenchman couldn't speak much English, but we communicated. And he was showing us around the old winery, and it just started the grapes there probably 3 or 5 days. It hadn't been too long. Had this tremendous wooden vat. And he showed us around, and we understood most of what he was saying. But he offered us a seat. There was a bench. We sat there, and he sat in his chair. And he said, oh, would you all like some grape juice? So we said, yes. So he went over to a cabinet. He got 3 big old water glasses. He goes to a tap on the barrel. And he fills those up, brings them over to us. Now, I made some homemade wine years ago. And wine, when it first ferments at a fast rate, then it slows down as time goes on. And I estimated the alcohol content maybe 3–4%. Well, the old Frenchman and I, we were sipping a little bit, but Felix was drinking the stuff like his water. And I said, Felix, you better slow down. I said, that's pretty good alcohol content in it. He said, oh, I said, no. I said, it tastes just like the Welch's grape juice my mother gave me. Well, the old Frenchman looked at me and we laughed. And he and I were still sipping on this first glass. And Felix said, he'd like to have some more. So the Frenchman goes over to get another glass full, gives to him, and Felix over there drinking it again like water. I said, Felix, you better slow down. You're going to get drunk. Well, after a while, Felix said, my head is getting to spin. I said, Felix, you're getting drunk. So I said, we better leave. So I helped Felix back to our area. He was down in another tent where I was. So I took him down to his tent, and I didn't see him again until the next morning. And Felix saw me, looked at me. He looked like something the cats had drug in. He said, when I get home, I said, I'm not even going to drink any more Welch's grape juice. Then we had, I guess I can tell you the story about a good friend, Steve Kozak. Steve Kozak, I guess, was one of my best friends. He was from Birmingham, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh, and Steve was a Polish descent. He was a super fine guy. We called him the Gentle Giant. And Felix and I used to, when we were in Europe, we pitched our tents together. Steve was about 6'4", 245, and I was 5'9", about 145, so we were more or less a Mutt and Jeff. But Steve was the kind of guy you trust your life with, and sometimes, you know, you got to depend on him. It was somewhere in France, and it was cold, it was miserable, it had been snowing, and it would warm up a little bit, the ground would thaw, then it freeze again, and mud was about a foot deep. One night we were pitched our tent, we were in there trying to sleep, couldn't get to sleep. And Steve got up and said, somebody built a fire. He said, I think I'm going to go out and heat some water and make some bouillon. I said, okay. So Steve goes out and apparently starts talking with some of the guys out there, and I doze off. Well, eventually Steve comes back and I'm asleep, and he shakes me and says, Joe, you awake? I said, I am now, you damn Polak. I can kill you. Well, when Polak did, that was not derogatory. We were not politically correct. But nobody thought anything of it. You know, we were good friends. We could call anybody anything you wanted. It was okay. They knew that was not a personal slur. Anyway, about 40-something years later, well, by the way, I had kept in touch with Steve until the Korean War, and Steve had come by Gainesville when I was going back to the University of Florida after the war and visited, and then we stayed in contact till, I guess, early summer of 1950 when I went back in the service. So I had not seen or heard from Steve in all those years. Well, I had to go to Pittsburgh in January of 1986 to close out a project. I was supervising a project with the University of Pittsburgh Medical School. And I had them there on my inventory, so I had to go back and have the inventory changed. And while there, I decided I would spend a couple of days just looking around, because I'd also gone to Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon, back the early part of my service. And I looked in the phone book, so I want to see if Steve Kozak is still there. So I looked in the phone book, and there was Steve Kozak over at Wilmerding, and the address looked the same as I recall. So I dialed it, and this lady answered. Now, Steve had married since I had conversed with him last, so I didn't know he was married. But this lady answered, and I said, I'm Joe Cocke. I served with Steve Kozak in World War II. Is this a Steve Kozak? She said, yes, and I know exactly who you are. But said, Steve passed away about 5, 6, 7 years ago, that he had cancer. And she told me this story, said, Steve told a lot of stories about you too. And she told this story exactly as I told you, that when he took it back and shook me, I said, you damn Polak, I could kill you. And I'm sitting there, I can't believe what I'm hearing. How can two people remember the same thing over that time and not forget it? It's amazing.
Can you tell me more about Mr. Kozak?
Memories?
Said he was a big guy. What was he, 6'4", 245? Is what you said?
Mm-hmm.
How big did you say he was? 6 foot? You said he was about 6'4".
Mm-hmm.
6'4", 245 pounds. What else was?
He was a. You couldn't ask for a finer guy. I would trust him with anything. My life.
And you said you always.
Then she told other stories that I remembered, and we had a big laugh. And she told stories that I'd forgotten. But the amazing thing is how you can remember something so insignificant and something that you would think would be significant, you can't remember. I can't remember a lot of things that happened. I can't remember places where I was or how I got there. But you can remember something so insignificant as that. I guess that's an amazing part of life.
How well could he hold his liquor?
Then,
I'm sorry.
when I was called back in Korea, I got a notice on a Tuesday afternoon to report to Fort Hood, Texas the next Monday morning. Well, I was working in Mississippi at that time, and my oldest daughter had been born in the latter part of July, and if I had to report next Monday morning in Fort Hood, that meant I had to close up my house in Leland, Mississippi, take my wife and daughter back down to Florida to stay with the family, and then get back to Fort Hood, Texas. Well, I had to make some plans in a hurry. So I asked for an extension of time, and the word came back, it's imperative that you report as ordered. Well, I thought that perhaps the war in Korea was depending on me. I didn't think I was that important. But I went back to, I made it back to Fort Hood, Texas that Monday morning. And we had 11 days a night of intensive training. I was mad the entire time because of not getting that delay. I wasn't trying to get out of it, I just wanted a delay. And then we went to Camp Stoneman, California, went by train. I was the last man that got over the train. We went to California, and we'd just gotten in, and I guess sometime that morning, and they told us, you know, roughly what the plan would be. Said eventually we'd be going to Korea. Well, I got in bed that night and hadn't even gone to sleep, and they called us and said, okay, get up. Said, you're going to get your field equipment, you're going to Korea. Well, we spent the night getting ready. They bussed us over to Travis Air Force Base, and we had breakfast, got on a plane, and off we went to Honolulu. We spent the night there, then we went on to Wake and on Japan, and then we were there for, I can't remember, just a few days. Then we got on the ship to go to Incheon. Our troops just recaptured Incheon, and we're moving up into North Korea. And when I got on the ship, I was the last man on. And normally, if you've been on a troop ship, when you get on, they give you a slip, tells you where you're staying. And I asked for mine, and said, we don't have one. I said, where am I going to stay? Wherever you find room. Well, that wasn't a very, after what had happened before, that wasn't a very welcome. Anyway, I got on the ship, and it so happened looked up, and here was the captain, and his wife and my wife were each other's waiting. And he says, where you staying? I said, I'm not. He said, well, come stay with us. So on the ship, the rest of the way, I stayed with his company. He was in a medical outfit. And we finally got around to Incheon, and we got up one morning at 3 o'clock, got all baggage out on the deck. We had breakfast, and we were going to go in Incheon. And we stayed out there all day. At about 6 o'clock that night, they said, we're not going in today. So now it was getting cold, and it's early winter, but it was tremendously cold. So we went up to, right back on the ship. Next morning we got up at 3 o'clock, went through the same routine, baggage on the deck. And about 6 o'clock that night, we got off and got a landing craft. And when we got on the landing craft, they told, when you get on land, said you're going to have a hot meal. Well, we finally got on the landing craft, and they had pretty rough tides there in Chum. And the guy that was operating the landing craft couldn't hit the spot he wanted to. So we tried, everybody giving him the devil. So he was even having a rougher time. Finally we made it, we got on. And
what do you mean by trying to hit the spot? What do you mean by trying to hit the spot? Just trying to hit the spot?
Well, to hit the land so we get off. They wanted to hit the beach there where we get off, but the tides, it just fouled up everything. And not being that we were invasion force, I mean, we hoping to land dry, because it was pretty cold. Well, we finally get in, and there was no hot food. They put us on trucks and took us to Yongdong Po. We go in this, it was a camp for transients. We go in, there no lights, no heat, rice mats. And we finally found room to play, and the dust was horrible. We got up next morning to go to breakfast, and they had a mess hall, but it might have well been outside, and the temperature now was probably around 15 degrees. Boy, it was cold, bitter. And in the mess hall there were no windows. And we dipped our mess kit right outside the door when we went in, and by the time you moved 5 feet, the 2 or 3 guys in front of you, if any water left there, it froze. Well, we were supposed to join the 205th, and they told us it was in Seoul. So we went over in this truck to Seoul, which is right across the Han River, it wasn't too far. And when we got in this area where the 205th is supposed to be, they told us the 205th's already moved to Pyongyang. So we went back to Yongdong Po. And the next day, they said, come on, we're going to take you to 205th. So we got on the truck, we go back to Seoul, same place. They tell us, the 205th's not here, they're in Pyongyang. So we go back, and by the way, there were 2 other reservists. We were the 3 first reservists over there. And there was one guy that he'd been back in the States because of a death in his family. He was with us, and then young man had been in the hospital. Well, the next day, everybody got out to leave. We were the only ones not called, the 5 of us. And we sat there. We went back in the tent. We found the stars and stripes. We found some wood, and they had a little stove in there. We got a fire. We cleaned out the tent and just sat down to really enjoy reading the paper and getting a little warm. And they called us to come out, that they were going to take us to Pyongyang. And the convoy had already left to go on. They said, oh, we'll catch up. We were in an open truck. And it was about 15 degrees. That's how cold it was. And we bundled up, and it was this open truck. Your nose would run and it'd freeze on your face. Water, freezing no time at all. And they said we'd catch up the convoy at some checkpoint, which we finally did about second checkpoint. And every once in a while, when we got a little further up, brr, so, you didn't know what was happening. So we'd stop and hit the ditch. And fortunately, it hadn't been snowing, and there was a lot of ice there, but thank goodness the rice paddies were frozen, so it wasn't that bad. And this happened all the way up to Pyongyang. Finally we said we weren't going to get out, but when you hear brrr, you move. You don't want to sit in that truck. We finally got to Pyongyang, and it was that night. And we get up there, and they had a mess hall open 24 hours a day. A real mess hall, and that's the best food we had in a long time. First time, but we were also told that the 205th was not up there, that they were going to send us back down to Seoul. We told, no, you're not. We're going to stay here. Anyway, we had to commandeer a truck. We found out what we did, we went over, saw a post office unit, and that's how we found out the 205th was there. So we commandeered the truck, and they took us down to the 205th, and they were, when we finally found them, they were in this big old warehouse. And the 205th was composed of 5 teams, and each team was assigned a division or some of the unit. And this was Team C that we were joining, and they were there in Pyongyang, and probably 20, 25 men. So when we walked in, the CO don't know what we were doing there, because he didn't know he was getting some replacements from reserves from the United States, but we joined out there. And it wasn't too long after that Chinese came in. And we were prepared to leave. It was quite a ways from there, Pyongyang to the border. But we were packed up, ready to leave, and when we got orders, we started down. And this is one of the probably saddest parts of it. In Europe, we didn't see refugees like this. But in Korea, when the Chinese were coming in, thousands and thousands of the North Koreans were heading south. And they had everything they owned on their back, on the A-frame, in a wheelbarrow, or a few had ox carts. And they were carried elderly and young babies. And I don't know if they had food or not. Mile after mile, that's all you saw. And the road was torn up because all the bridges had been bombed out, and all the tanks and heavy equipment on the roads. Roads are just rolled, so road real rough. So we were not in the convoy, we were by ourselves. Now, we had some smart guys in the motor pool. They had built a little device, a little shelf-like device, around the manifold. And we'd take our C rations in the morning and we'd put them around there, and then when we stopped eating, the meals were hot. Well, we'd been issued our rations for the day, our C rations, and we had them there, down the manifold. There was a truck driver and a guy riding shotgun, and about 4 or 5 of us in the back. And to me, I didn't know, I hardly knew these guys, but I had been there long. And the guy driving the truck, he seemed like a kind of a gruff person, you know, didn't know how to react. But that's the way he impressed me. And he told us earlier, when I see a nice spot down the road, we'll stop and have lunch. Well, all we saw going down were these refugees. And finally, about noontime, a lot of refugees had stopped. Didn't hardly see anybody eating. And he pulled off the road, and there weren't too many refugees in this spot, only maybe 10 or 12, right near where we stopped. And when we stopped, the truck driver got out, he opened the hood, and he got out a can of food. And he took a little old can opener, and he opened it up, and he got a spoon, and he took it over to one of the refugees. Everybody else did the same thing. We gave them all the food we had. And the thing that so impressed me, I could see them now. I couldn't understand their words, but the expression on their face of thanks, I'll never forget it. Sometimes you're not hungry. Well, we finally got down to Seoul. Not much was said on that trip, not much. But but you knew with some real fine fellas.
How long had you been in country up to that point? Was that only about a week in country
Pardon?
Is this still just about a week when you've been in Korea, or?
No, we'd been there several weeks. It's time. That's another thing, you can't remember time. You remember being in these places, but we'd been up in Pyongyang a while. I think last November when the Chinese came in, I don't remember the exact dates. But they came in, and of course we had fellows from our company, other teams with the divisions over on the eastern side, and that's where a lot of them got, we had several that were killed over there.
What was your job in the company? What was your task in the company? What your job in the company? Your assignment. What did you do?
I was supposed to be a radio repairman, but I didn't do much of that. I did in Europe. I did a whole lot, but we were never in the place long enough. The only time was after we went back to we went to Japan, then came back, and I was down at Taegu for a while, and we did some love work there. And then just before I came home, I was up above, not too far from the 38th parallel, a little place, Tongashani. And I don't know exactly where that is. I can't pinpoint it because it's a small town. It's up above, Weijangbu is up above Seoul. And it was someplace up above Weijangbu. And we were doing some work up there. But not, after the Chinese came in and we had gone back down to Busan, the three of us World War II veterans, we were sent on temporary duty to engineering outfit. We were supposed to help to put in supervising installation of barbed wire and other defenses to either slow down or stop the Chinese. And I don't even remember where that was, but it was tremendously cold. And we had hundreds of Korean workers that in the mornings they would load up those A-frames with a spool of barbed wire, and they were probably 80 pounds. And we'd climb up this mountain, and that's where they'd do the work. We'd get up the mountains, and that was a job going up there. But they went up every day, and we stayed with this company for quite a while. Then when we finished our job, we were going back down to 205th, and we found out they had gone back to Japan to regroup, and they were going to reassign us another outfit, but we were not, we didn't want to go anyplace else. So we prevailed, and they finally sent us back to Japan, and we joined the outfit there. Most of them had been back a while, and Japan was like a resort area compared to what we had in Korea. There was nothing in Korea. We couldn't get warm. In Europe, we could always find the old building or something to get warm. But in Korea, everything in the area was bombed out. And it's so cold during the winter that, it's kind of miserable. I never got warm till summer, until I went back to Japan, really. But I think everybody will tell you that was there during the winter of 1950-51. That was it was like a refrigerator. I've never been so cold in my life.
Did you get you said you joined the reserves after World War II?
Yeah, I joined the reserve after World War II. I did not join when I was discharged, but it was when I was in college. I joined the unorganized reserve, and they were supposed to have been called up after the organized reserve, but I was called up.
Did you what did you do in between finishing your deployment in World War II in France and starting? What did you do in between World War II and Korea?
Well, after I finished college, I went to work with the federal government. I was at the Cotton Gin Research Lab in Stoneville, Mississippi, and that's when I was called back. And when I came home, I went back to Mississippi, but there was an opening in Belle Glade, Florida, and I was so tired of cold weather, I was ready to get warm weather, so I transferred down to Belle Glade. Then, after being there a while, they were opening a cotton ginning research lab here in Clemson, and I wanted to get another degree, so I asked about
what kind of research lab? What kind of research lab? What research lab did you say was being opened here in Clemson?
a cotton ginning research. The Southeastern Cotton Ginning Research Laboratory was to be opened here in 1955. So I asked to be transferred so I could get another degree here at Clemson. And I moved here in July of 1955. And they can't even push me out now.
What did you finish your degree with? From you graduated from the University of Florida?
Yep.
What with?
Ag engineering. It's almost like mechanical engineering, because all the time I was working federal government, I was research. In Mississippi, it was the cotton ginning. In South Florida, it was long vegetable fibers. Then in here, it was cotton ginning. Then, when the cotton ginning lab closed in 1973, I transferred over to the Cotton Quality Research Station, which at that time was in Serene Hall on the Clemson campus. Then I went across the lake. But our main project then was related to cotton dust, and we were running human exposure studies, exposing them to cotton dust and measuring their reaction. And that's why we had these contracts with medical universities, several throughout the United States, that were working with us.
Now, did you get promoted to staff sergeant? You got promoted after World War II, but did you get promoted before you went to Korea when you got promoted? Your promotion to staff sergeant, was that before you went to Korea, or was that while you were in Korea?
I still do.
Promotion to staff sergeant, when was that? To your, when you were promoted to an E5 or E6? When did you get promoted to staff sergeant?
Well, that was over in Korea.
Was that over in Korea?
But they didn't want to do that. Simple reason, they said we were reservists. But we had some fellows that went to bat for us, and said, "My gosh, you know, these guys know more than people got here." And that was, I noticed a big difference in Korean Wars compared to World War II. The World War II, I felt the personnel were better trained. They were all good people, but they didn't have the training. I thought that in Korea, they didn't know a lot of the basics. And the three of us in World War II, I hate to say it, but in one place we almost ran the outfit because they didn't know. They would come to us and ask us different things. What did you do? And I don't know whether it was better training or being a little bit older, and maybe looking back at some of the things we experienced in World War II, that, you know, you could make a judgment about some things that you had not considered before, that maybe on experience and maybe reading history and other, I don't know, just maybe, sometimes maybe a gut feeling. But a lot of the simple things that I thought Well, for example, we were down in Pusan after the Chinese, and part of our outfit was already there, partners coming down to join us. And we had some of these large 24-man tents. And with others coming where we were located, we did not have enough room to spread out. We had to put it pretty close. And they wondered how they were going to move this tent so to make more room. And the master sergeant company came to me and said, "What would you do?" I said, "Give me a few minutes and I'll figure it out for you." And I figured out the weight of what we had to lift. And I went back and said, "Sergeant," he was thinking about, getting rollers or something. I said, "We'll take all the equipment out of the building, out of the tent, cots, bag, everything." I said, "We've got enough men, we can pick that doggone thing up and move it any place we want." And we did. He said, "Never thought about that." But I mean, a lot of times it was just using common sense about something. And there were a lot of times that you saw things that just simple answers. I've got a big book over there. That's about the Korean War. And my next door neighbor, that's his book. But I'm reading in there, and the incompetence. There's so much incompetence in a lot of the officers that were assigned there. There was a lot of politics involved. Alcohol was involved in numerous cases where the fellows were just alcoholic and should never have been in positions of command. And of course, you can always question something after the fact. But, in a war, as in some other bit, sometimes you don't have a second chance. You better be right the first time.
Well, what about, do you remember any of the times you were promoted when you were in France?
No, I was sergeant when I went to France.
By the time you got to France? Mm-hmm. Was the...
Well, when you went as a company, you have your TO, table of organization, and it called for certain grades for different MOS, which your specialty. And that was it. Unless somebody left and that position open, you might get some of those, a guy, a PFC would get promoted to corporal. But there were not that many unless you had a lot of transfers in or out. I was offered a direct commission towards the end of the war, but I had to stay for 3 years, I think it was that one. And then I was offered a direct commission when I went back in the Korean War, but I had to stay. It was 2 or 3 years, and I was called back for 14 months or less, and having a small child and a wife, and I didn't want to make it a career, so I turned it down. And when I went back to Japan, I had not been paid since I'd been back in service. And at Nara, pretty close to Osaka, the finance officer was in Osaka. And we went up, after I got back to Japan, they took us over to Osaka to get our pay, and I walked in the finance officer, and I looked over there, and there was an old buddy of mine from the University of Florida. And like me, he'd been called back. And we got together, I visited him several times. And on his desk at that time, he had a letter, offered him a commission. And like me, he was called back for 14 months less. So I told him, I said, "Jake," I said, "I turned mine down. I'm betting on 14 months. So he turned his down too. Well, it so happened that when I went back, when I was discharged, and he was discharged, he was at Delray Beach, Florida, and that's when I transferred from Mississippi down to Del Glade. So we were close together again and got back together frequently. And JJ went to work with Burger King, I believe it was, and when I was still working sometime in the early 80s. He was in the real estate end of Burger King and had come up to Clemson and was looking at an area over in Easley. And he came by my office one day, and I happened to walk out of the office, and I recognized him out in the hall in the back of his head. I said, J.J. Brown, what are you doing here? He said, I'm looking for you. And he stopped by another time. Then after he retired, he moved to Texas, and we still correspond every Christmas. But, you know, we went to college together, and because I told him I turned it, he said, I'd like to accept it. And he told me after we got back down in Florida, said, I'm sure glad I did that.
Now, what was the name of the companies you were in both times?
I was 3125th Signals Service Company in Europe, and 205th Signal Repair Company in Korea.
And I guess how close both times were you to actual frontline fighting, or how close both times were you to actual fighting, or?
Well, in Europe, not close. In Korea, what happened in Korea, when our troops went north, instead of driving them back, they just formed a wedge, and the North Korean troops went to the side. So they just hurried to it. So they were there all the time, and you didn't know who was friend or foe. So this is where, you know, they were always shooting around. You didn't know whether they were shooting at you. It was almost like a war zone as far as guns going off. But you didn't know whether friend or foe. So you had to be real careful. That's why I went and told when we were going on gang, and you can't take a chance, you hit the ditch. I mean, you're trained to do that. And maybe, you know, we never knew whether they were shooting at us or just somebody's got a gun just shooting. Because there were probably a lot of, you know, there's always a lot of lost ammunition and guns during war. And people swipe them, and a lot of them get a gun in their hand and they want to shoot. Maybe they're shooting up in the air, but you don't know. We were in our compounds. We always had machine gun nests set up in case, and you never knew. We had people shooting around us all the time, but we never had anybody hurt. I don't know. You don't know whether that is in those compounds. You don't know whether they're actually shooting at you. And if you don't hear anything hitting close by, you kind of feel like they're not. It's when you hear something hitting close by, that's when you better worry.
So what was Japan like as far as being stationed 10 years after the war?
Japan was
a decade after the war.
So that was where they went back for rest and relaxation and to regroup. And it was like, I guess, being a resort almost compared to war zone, because you just, for example, now when we came back from the three of us reservists came back from temporary duty with the engineering company, we had our overcoats. We had not had any clothes. We weren't anywhere we get clothes cleaned. We had all of our overcoats, all our clothes were dirty. We still had all of our field gear. And we got on a little boat that went back and forth from Busan to Sasebo, Japan. And the place where we left, they packed a sack lunch for us overnight. And we were only three Americans, only three passengers on it going on this particular trip. Got to Sasebo, we had orders for a train to go to Osaka. Now when we got on Sasebo, got on the train, here we were with our rifles, ammunition belts, all our field gear, duffel bag. We were filthy. I mean, our clothes were filthy. Overcoats had diesel oil on them. And we were, in Japan, this was a, bit of war-free zone. They were dressed up like military dress. And we were just opposite. Well, we were on a train, and all the Japanese were looking at us, and we finally got up to Osaka, and we found out that we did not have transportation from Osaka down to Nara. So we went down to the transportation office, found out where it was, went down there, and here we still dressed up like this. He had our rifles and all this stuff, and lugging these duffel bags. MPs were out in front, and they told us we couldn't go in there like that. But we told them, that's all we had, we just got in. So they let us in. We went up, and they gave us orders, cut orders so we could go down and get on the train to go to Nara. They cut orders for us, and we asked them, was there Army mess nearby? I said, no, but there's a lot of good restaurants. And that doesn't do us any good. Says, we haven't been paid, we don't have any money. So they took up a free will offer. And we couldn't speak Japanese, so one of the sergeants in there said, I'll go down with you and help you order. So they gave us money to get something to eat. Then we got to, this one was Saturday, and when we got to Nara, we looked in the military phone book and found out where our outfit was, and we called them, and they said that they couldn't send a truck after us because it was Saturday and the boat pool was closed. We said, here we are down here. I said, how are we going to get there? Well, one of the guys saw a GI truck coming along, so he stopped the guy and said, would you take us out to wherever the 205th is? And so he took us out, and we got out there, and everybody's off on pass. So we went in, and there was one guy in the office, so he told us where we could bunk, and so we got there. But it was getting back there and being a Saturday when nobody was working. there was a fire cry from 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But it was nice there. We had one thing about Nara. That was the old capital of Japan, and it was a beautiful place. It had a tremendous Buddha there, and it was a nice little town to visit. But they got with the PX again, and had a theater, you know, and this was something we hadn't seen in months. And we went to the theater one night and went in, and it was a little cloudy, cool. And you know, they only showed one movie, showed one time. And when we came out, there was about 6 inches of snow on the ground. And nobody came in and said it was snowing, but about 6 inches had fallen when we were there, and there was no breeze whatsoever. Just boom, came down. But imagine going in and coming out, see all the snow. That happened about 2 hours.
So I would say, how long of a movie was that? So you turned down your commission afterwards in Japan. When did you actually receive pay?
Well, I got some pay when we went back to Japan, and this was, I don't remember when we went, probably about February. No, I can't remember a good time, but see, I went back in September, and I hadn't been paid at all. Now I had allotment from my wife, and she'd been getting it. So, and what I got was just a small amount. I didn't need much. So I could only get a small amount, but still I didn't have any money. So until that was my first pay, and the other two reservists with it, they were in the same situation. They had not been paid either. And when they started paying, they didn't have me down for overseas pay. So they had to get that corrected.
Oh, they were getting paid as if they were still back on base back?
Oh, yeah. When you're overseas, you get a different pay rate. You get in the States.
Well, so you get back to Belmead, Florida? You said you got back to Belmead, Florida was the place you finished up at. Where did you actually get your final discharge papers? Where were you finally discharged? At what base were you finally?
Oh, you mean in the from Korea, or well, in World War II in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, after Korean War, Fort Breckinridge, Kentucky. We came into San Francisco by ship, and when we got there, they had contrary to what, you know, in the Vietnam War, the San Francisco newspaper had a special, and they had it fixed up just about it. But there was a list of everybody on that ship. Then we we took a ferry up to Cape Stoneman, then we went to some airport. It wasn't military, it was a commercial airline. We flew to Albuquerque and then flew to someplace in Kentucky where it was, then the Fort Breckenridge, where we were discharged.
Since then, what are some events that you've seen happen in America, such as moon landing, Berlin Wall, things like that, that stand out to you? JFK being shot?
I don't know, I guess some would be my personal beliefs. And maybe I wouldn't want to share them in this sort of situation because it would be too personal, I think.
How many of, you said your oldest daughter, how many kids have you had?
Pardon?
How many kids did you have? How many kids?
Oh, two.
Two?
The one here you met, and then I have a daughter down in Greenwood. And
I'm from 96.
okay, you know Dr. Ramage in Greenwood?
I think so.
Real tall guy?
I can't picture him.
Died with a digestive disease group there.
I don't think I know him.
Okay. That's my son-in-law, and they had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, so I got 3 grandchildren. Now the oldest one, well, the 2 grandsons are in Charleston, and the granddaughter's in Virginia. 2 of them are lawyers, and one is with the BioSense Webster, which is a medical device company, and it's somewhat like he's explained to me, I can't tell, but somewhat like a pacemaker.
How long did you work at Clemson?
Well, I didn't work at Clemson. I worked with the federal government, but was located there. So I was here from I worked 1955, July 1955 till I retired at the end of February in 1986. But at one time, I was at Serene Hall when our unit was based there. Then we went over to the Ravenel Research Center across the lake, and that's where we located the last several years.
Well, I guess finishing up, looking back at your service, is what would you say about it changed you the most? What would you say about your service changed you the most? Would you say, if you had to go back, would you choose to go on another service? Would you choose to go Navy instead of Army, or?
No, you never know. I wouldn't want to go back, but I would. You can't change things, and I wouldn't. I have 2 recurring dreams. One is being back in military service, and I've been in every service in the dreams. But that's a frequent dream. I don't know whether there are other veterans have those dreams or not, but that's one recurring dream. The other recurring dream is I'm back in school, and I can't find my classroom, or I don't have my lesson prepared.
I think that's a pretty universal one for the entire planet.
But those are 2. But I've been in every branch of the military in my dreams, and I can't say that I preferred any of them. No, it's. I would have served. Back in World War II, it wasn't trying to get out of service. You were trying to get in. The people that were not accepted, they were not happy. They were sad. I mean, that was just people at that time. Because it was different. It was war. We were involved, and I think the mindset was a little bit different then. You had people objecting to the war naturally. You had conscientious objectors, but a lot of those served in the medical corps and in other things, but still, they served. But now, it's hard to explain, I guess, worldwide situations. Some of them, you try to justify some and then you can't justify, I guess. It's kind of like, for example, if somebody came up and attacked you, if I sat here and did nothing, I don't think that's right. I think I ought to help you out. And when we see, and let's say a family, you go protect the family, and let's say it even grows bigger. So that's it. It grows until it's a war. That you can, I guess you can justify. You can justify anything you want, really. But when you see people that are suffering because at the hands of others, you can't sit back and do nothing. Can you? Look at the world situation now. There are places where it's hard to explain. you can be opposed to war, but you're still for justice. And how you achieve that, you got to make a decision. Do you go and help somebody if they holler, "Help me," or do you just sit back and you can't get involved in that? It's not our position. So there's a moral aspect, and we all have different ideas about what we should do and how far we should go. I guess I have conflicts myself on what we should do. I know one thing though: if you're going to have a war, go to win. Don't go to piddle around. And that's what yes, innocent people are going to suffer. They always do. And innocent people suffer even if you don't have a war. So what do? I don't know. And I don't think anybody else really knows. We all have different ideas.
Well, I certainly say you would know more about it than I would, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this so we could get down everything.
Pardon me for getting a little emotional, but
it's perfectly all right.
It's hard when you think about some of the things. Sometimes you talk about it and it doesn't bother you, and other times it just boom. Christmas, I was together with a family up in Virginia, with my granddaughters and most of us there. And one of my grandsons asked me about some stuff. I was telling him about this incident over in Korea with the people where we stopped and fed them. And that just struck me so hard that, if you see the people's face, you think an actress or an actor trying to simulate some emotion, they couldn't even come close to the look on these people's face of gratitude. I mean, you just look. I can see it now. An expression of gratitude is something I couldn't even paint a picture of it, but I see it so clearly still after all these years. Other things I can't even remember. But things of that nature that I guess, well, you're young, but you probably remember things from your youth when you were just a little boy that are insignificant, but you remember them clearly. Do you not?
Have you ever seen anybody so happy to get sea rations? Have you ever seen anybody so happy to get sea rations?
I still do.
Have you ever seen anybody so happy to get sea rations?
When you, yeah, you were when you were hungry. So, some of them were pretty good. In World War II, we had K rations, and they were not good. And then they had a D ration. The D ration was a little chocolate bar. And I remember it said, "This is supposed to last for a day." Well, it was so hard, it'd take a hammer to break up the thing. It'd take all day to eat the thing. But that was the D ration. And then when I went back in the Korean War, they had the C rations. They had other types of C rations, but they had developed them better. And the C rations during the Korean War were not too bad. They had several things, and you could take a pick of them. What we'd normally do, if you didn't have, the fresh food to prepare, if they had a C ration, they'd put them in a big old tub and have a fire underneath there. They'd get them hot. The same thing we did on that, putting that little frame around the manifold. We'd put them up there and they'd get hot. It was a whole lot better if it's hot, but I've eaten plenty of them cold, because if you're out in the field, you can't do it. But when we were on temporary duty with the engineering company on top of those mountains, and they were cold. Oh, it filled your stomach. It wasn't, being warm been a whole lot better, but still, they were tasty. And they've improved a whole lot during the years. During the early part of World War II, when they had powdered eggs, those things smelled horrible. And some of the other foods that they were just starting to eat, they were horrible too. When we went to Europe, we stopped in England for a little while, and we were there about a week or so, I guess, maybe a little longer. And we had mutton. And most of it apparently was not butchered properly, and it tasted just like it smelled. And we got sick and tired, so one night, there were 4 or 5 of us. We went over to another company, and one of the guys got a clipboard, and we went over to this mess hall, and we said that we were there to check it out. And we looked around and inspect for cleanliness and that sort of thing. They didn't know who we were. And we'd ask about what all they had, and they showed us. So we would sample the food. It wasn't mutton. And we finally got our stomachs filled, and we left, and we told them we'd give them a good report. But we had no authority, but at least we got something good to eat from there instead of mutton. We had mutton and bread, then they switched and had bread and mutton.
Well, that's a lesson right there. Act like you know what you're doing.
But the mutton wasn't that bad. In 1992-93, I served as consultant over in Pakistan. And we would go out to these different companies, and they knew we were coming, and they'd have lunch prepared. And we always had a goat stew. Now, see, the water over there was not pure, so you couldn't drink it. And I didn't even wash my hands with it. I washed my hands, but you still, when you got the, and they didn't have any eating utensils. You had what they call a naan, which is kind of like a cornmeal mix. They put it on inside of a fired brick oven almost, or clay oven. And then when it gets kind of starting to get burnt, then it dries out, they catch it with a pan and bring it out. So you take this naan, you put it down in the stew and eat it. Well, I never could develop a good grasp of how to do it properly, and I would get the stew on my lips. And most of this was pretty hot. And you'd get there and my nose would start running. I had 2 interpreters, and they said they knew when it was getting hot because my nose would start running. but that was, I guess I ate more goat stew than in several months I've eaten that entire. I know I have, but some of it was pretty good. But the seasoning, it varied. It's on a mile, and most of it was pretty hot.
Well, is there, I guess, anything else you might want to say before we wrap up, or?
No, I think that covers most of what. I will tell you now about my wife. It's funny one. During World War II, we had olive drab clothes, including underwear. Now the shorts, they were made out of some of the strongest material I've ever seen. I believe you could put a 10-man team on each side, and use those shorts, and I bet they wouldn't rip. Well, when I came home in World War II, that's all I had because of all that long period of time. So all my underwear was Army drab underwear, and you couldn't wear things out there, hardly ever a fade. And I started back at the University of Florida, and they had, at that time I was not married, but they had a village for the married students, and very few people had a drying machine. They had sun dried, so on the clothesline, you'd always see that olive drab underwear, so you knew that guy was a veteran. Well, after I got married in September of '47, I still had a whole lot of this olive drab underwear. I couldn't wear that. And eventually my wife said, I wish you would get rid of those and get some white ones or some with color or patterns. I said, I don't go around dropping my pants and showing people my underwear. I said, you know who got them. I said, but you don't do the same thing showing yours. So it went on, and finally they started wearing out, and she would put them in a rag bag, you know, she'd take off the grippers and put them in the rag bag. So about early part of 1950, I guess, all of my old olive drab was worn out, or she'd put them in the rag bag and she'd replace them with some solid colors or patterns of white. So when I was called in for the Korean War, and there used to be all this new olive drab underwear. So when I came after 14, 15 months, it was still in pretty good shape. So I came home, and I got home, I had this duffel bag, and I started pulling stuff out. I said, hon, look what I've got. I said, if you want to, you can put them in the rag bag. And she did.
Well, excuse me. Well, any final last words of wisdom? I know I just asked that question, but you seem to keep coming up with stories. I don't want to leave anything out. All right, well, thank you, sir, for your service, and thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I hope that's what